This is a video game. This is the gaming industry. And in the gaming industry,
there is no Nintendo CD. Understood?
Is at war. The very same genre that made Nintendo a household word had allowed SEGA to topple the empire. The genre that had dominated console gaming for nearly 10 years. The 2D platformer. Many a third-party developer would try their hand at building an attitudinal animal mascot of their very own. But one company was conspicuous by its absence: Rare. Rare was co-founded in 1985 by the Stamper brothers, Tim and Chris. The UK studio had achieved a fair bit of notoriety, cranking out more than 40 titles for the NES. But when the 16-bit wars began, Rare largely stayed on the sidelines. Aside from a couple of Battletoads games, including a crossover as bizarre as it was awesome, the company had yet to make a mark in the 16-bit era. Their absence was no accident. While other companies were rushing out with ill-conceived concepts, the Stampers decided to take a different risk. They invested their NES profits into obscenely expensive Silicon Graphics workstations, the bleeding edge of 3D capability. The stations were intended primarily for film effects, but the Stampers wanted to see what they could do for gaming. They developed a method to animate polygonal models on Silicon Graphics and transfer these animations to a format the Super Nintendo could display. Pushing a game console way past what it was supposed to be able to do would become one of the signature hallmarks of the company, and it began here. Rare showed off its work to Nintendo, who swiftly scooped up 49% of the company. The newly minted Rareware was suddenly one of the most technologically advanced developers in the world, and with Nintendo backing them, it was time to create a game that would make them famous. So this is a video game. Video games look like this, feel like this, and then one day, you see this. And this is not on Sega's fancy new 32X. This isn't on a CD-ROM. Heck, this ain't even next gen. This is Donkey Kong Country. So why did Rare and Nintendo decide to bring back Donkey Kong? The character debuted as an antagonist in 1981, and at least at first, he was the star. The game was even named after him, while the player character was a bit of an afterthought, to the point that his name merely described what he did when you hit the button. But while Jumpman would evolve far beyond these roots and end up as the icon of the entire industry, DK was left in this primordial state. Aside from a few cameos and remakes, Donkey Kong hadn't appeared in over a decade. But that's exactly why DK was such a perfect fit for this project. He was famous enough to be recognized, yet outdated enough to be reinvented. So the Stampers took this long period of absence to heart, and did something really unusual in gaming, even today. They aged up the characters. Donkey Kong had gotten old, he'd gone gray, he'd become cranky, and he'd passed his name on to his son. DK Jr. lost the singlet, put on a tie, and became the modern-day Donkey Kong. Or maybe DK Jr. had a son and it's this guy, it's kind of ambiguous. The setting was moved from bright red construction girders to a place far better suited to showing off those Silicon graphics. Donkey Kong Island. And where your father's Donkey Kong was a barrel-throwing, lady-swapping bad guy, Rare's Donkey Kong was laid back and peaceful, if a bit hedonistic. DK wants nothing more than to relax on his island and hoard bananas. And so the game begins, and DK busts out of his treehouse. Now the genre's conventions meant that you needed to move right, but directly behind you, an open cave. Now let's say you were like every other kid I knew, and you skipped right over the instruction manual. Going in the cave would convey a hint of the story. DK's peaceful demeanor would be challenged when King K. Rool and his Kremling crew stole his banana hoard on a dark and stormy night. And by the way, if you did skip the instructions, you really missed out. I love the way Cranky breaks the fourth wall throughout, insulting the game, the player, and the very concept of notes pages. While I have no idea what a bunch of reptiles want with mountains of bananas, it's awesome how that forms the crux of the game. Most other game heroes were out to save princesses, conquer empires, save the world. But DK, he was a man of the 90s, and he just wanted his stuff back. Back outside the cave, you might hop up to the treehouse. If you go inside, you'll score an extra life. Now both the cave and the treehouse are pretty obviously meant to teach the player something. This game is going to have hidden secrets. Keep your eyes open and explore, and you will be rewarded. The treehouse even plays the bonus stage theme. A few paces up is the game's first enemy, a naughty. Now maybe you walk right into it. That's it. There's no life bar, no hit points, nothing to keep you safe. To showcase the game's graphical fidelity, the decision was made early on to keep the screen free from clutter. Instead of a litany of counters and HUD elements, collectibles would only scroll on screen when they were relevant and slip off to let the player stay immersed. That might sound simple, but this decision had an impeccable influence on every element of the game design, because when you get past that naughty, you find a DK barrel. Mega Man had a health bar, Mario had his power-ups, and Sonic could take hits forever as long as he could hold onto a ring. Instead of anything like that, Donkey Kong would have a partner, Diddy Kong. Thanks to this tag team dynamic, you didn't feel alone in this world, and that too was intentional. Getting back the Banana Hoard was a community effort, headed up by an extended Kong family. A pastiche of early 90s surfer culture named Funky Kong can give you quick access to earlier worlds. Cranky Kong spouts off hilariously self-aware dialogue and gives you hints. And instead of saving from a menu, what? This is Candy Kong and this is her save point. Okay, I mean, plus 10 for not being a damsel in distress, but minus several million for being a 40s pinup mixed with a gorilla. Yeah, I don't know, even when I was a kid, she always just creeped me out. Yeah, she can kiss my donkey. Get it? Because a donkey is also called an ass, you see, and, okay. The barrels themselves are the one holdover from DK's arcade roots, and the game's focus on throwing them, blasting out of them, and using them to find bonus rooms is one of the things that sets DKC apart from most other platformers. By this point in the level, the music is picked up, that distinctive DK Island swing. As amazing as the game looked, the way it sounded would be just as important in giving it its identity. I remember magazines that claimed it sounded so good, you'd swear there was a CD inside the cartridge. It wasn't what people thought of as video game music. Evelyn Fisher, Robin Beanland, and David Wise's soundtrack was more cinematic and thoughtful, and would often incorporate environmental sounds into some incredibly memorable medleys. But while all the praise the soundtrack gets is very well deserved, the sound effects tend to get overlooked. Jungle Hijinks has 4 distinct enemy types, and wouldn't you know it, each one makes a different noise. You can hear a DK barrel from off-screen before you reach it, and late in the game when you're tense and nervous and frustrated, just hearing that sound is a godsend. There's a real sense of place in this game. It has a sophistication that was often lacking in games at the time. I mean, these are still cartoon apes fighting anthropomorphic reptiles, sure, but it was mature not in its themes, but in its tone. Some stages are huge and bombastic, but others are melancholy or thoughtful, and at least a few are downright chilling. Through all these elements, Donkey Kong Country was able to achieve an atmosphere that no video game had ever matched. About halfway through the first stage, you'll come across a crate. Busting it open reveals an animal buddy, Rambi the Rhino. And this guy is freaking strong. Everything about him accentuates that. He powers through a line of naughties. He makes this distinct, powerful galloping sound. He's basically invincible from the front. If it can die, it will die. Animal buddies are another big part of what'll give this series its identity. They're level specific, allowing the developers to theme some stages around them. When they get hit, they'll go running off, and you might be able to chase them down again. Animal buddies help to keep the gameplay fresh, and their designs are not only appealing, they immediately inform what they can do. Espresso's skinny legs can't hurt enemies, but he can float through the air. On Guard is easier to control underwater, and his nose is just as effective as Rambi's horn. I hear he also occasionally shows up as a hologram. Spox holds a light for you in one level, back in the days before sudden flashing lights were considered a problem. And finally, Winky is a frog and is absolutely perfect in every way. Finding any of these guys was always exciting, and just like the Kong family lent a hand, they too showcase a deliberate design. Instead of adding power-ups or menu options or hit points, Rare instead added distinct characters, and it gives the game so much more vibrancy as an interconnected world. As for Rambi, he can also bust through hidden entrances, and in Jungle Hijinks, a new player is almost certain to slip down here, break the wall, and end up in the first proper bonus room. When you come back to the level, you burst out the other side, hop down to the only platform you can see, and discover that items can be hidden underground. Maybe that clues you into another bonus room, and starts to reinforce the idea that a barrel often indicates a nearby secret. As you reach the end of the stage, a storm starts to roll in, darkening the entire scene and highlighting just how gorgeous this world looks and how fluent the graphic designers had already become. You can even turn around and head back through the level like this. Now maybe you're thinking to yourself, okay, so the graphics were pretty, But aside from presentation, this really wasn't anything new. Plenty of other platformers had you throwing things, plenty of them had hidden secrets, the two-character dynamic instantly reminded me of Tails, and the animal buddies were blatantly variations on Yoshi. Even in 1994, DKC was often compared to Super Mario World. But while it might have a similar structure to a Mario game, I'll argue that the comparison was faulty, because Donkey Kong Country did not play like Mario. Tapping the Y button lets the Kongs roll or cartwheel through enemies, and every time you hit one, you move a little faster. That momentum would even be preserved if you went over a ledge or jumped. You can also roll off ledges and jump in midair to clear more distance or reach higher areas. The lead designer, Greg Mayles, said years later, Super Mario World was sublime and intricate, best appreciated at a slower speed. Whereas Donkey Kong Country was extravagant and brash. You can take your time through this game, taking in the atmosphere and looking for secrets. In fact, I would encourage you to. But once you have, once the graphics have lost their spectacle and you know where everything is, here's the kicker. Every obstacle, every enemy, every vine and platform and blast barrel is placed in such a way that if you're skilled, you can move through the game with a speed and grace worthy of the aesthetic. DK and Diddy didn't change attributes or gain powers, and so the focus could be not on merely overcoming obstacles, but on skill mastery. Now that sounds familiar. Isn't there some other series that focus on building your skill to speed ever more impressively through painstakingly designed levels? Maybe one I spent all summer talking about? Yeah, there it is. Donkey Kong Country controlled like Mario and had the same sort of linear, focused level design, but I argue that it could be played a whole lot more like Sonic. It certainly felt unlike anything that had come before. It was more technical than Mario, more deliberate than Sonic, and way less forgiving than either of them. Playing Donkey Kong Country to perfection is akin to the rhythm of a musical instrument. Over the next generation, a big part of Rare's MO would be to take Nintendo's revolutionary concepts and do them bigger, faster, and stronger too. This is where that lineage began, by blending the crunchy precision of Mario's design, the kinetic flow of Sonic's, and an unprecedented style. DKC aimed to be the creme de la creme of action platformers. But as fun as it was, and as outstanding as it looked, DKC wasn't perfect. Yep, animal tokens. Collect 3 of them, and you'll be yanked into a bonus stage to earn lives. The problem is, they completely and often unexpectedly interrupt the gameplay that's supposed to be the focus of this design. Cranky claims they aren't even in the game, and I wish he was right. I always just try to avoid them. Speaking of which, the bonus stages themselves are kinda undercooked. Most of them are hidden pretty cleverly, but a few are just way too unintuitive. I mean, here's one that's entirely reliant on a leap of faith, and this is in the 2nd level. Most of them are better than that, but they still lack variety. Match items, grab bananas, jump correctly, it just gets repetitive. Worse yet, aside from a slightly different ending, there's no new content for finding all the bonus levels. Cranky's hints only cover World 1 for some reason, no matter where you are in the game, and the only really good boss was King K. Rool himself. The others were just kinda simplistic, and most of them were even recolors. As you get deeper into Donkey Kong Country, the levels themselves become less varied. Every world in the game introduces at least one new archetype, except for the final one, Chimp Caverns. And there's another problem. DKC has only 4 of the iconic jungle stages that are so overtly associated with the series. There are 2 treetop stages, 4 water stages, only 1 of these stunningly beautiful ice stages. But there are, no joke, 10 stages that take place in a dimly lit cave or mine. And I mean, I love the tough minecart stages, but coming to yet another cave starts to feel like a chore. All of this is a consequence of a pretty short development time, combined with a ton of pressure. DKC was rough around the edges and even unfair in places. It's a fun game, but it's certainly a flawed one. A ton of style, but not enough substance. Ultimately, I suppose, it's proof that players will put up with mediocre gameplay as long as the art's good. Nah, I'm kidding. Shigeru Miyamoto, if you somehow don't know, is the creator of Mario and Donkey Kong and a ton of other iconic Nintendo franchises. For a long time, it was kind of an urban legend that he'd said that about Donkey Kong Country. I can't find an original source, and it's almost certainly not true. Miyamoto was in fact regularly consulted during the game's development. Nonetheless, DKC would face a lot of backlash as the years went on, and that quote is emblematic of that backlash. All due respect to Shiggy, but if he ever said that, he was wrong. Donkey Kong Country had some issues, sure. What were amazing visuals in 1994 look like dithered plastic nowadays. But what Donkey Kong Country proved was that the coming leap in graphical fidelity would allow for not just different, but more immersive gaming experiences than what had come before. It showed us a glimpse into the future of the medium, and just as importantly, it didn't abandon what made gaming so great in the first place. DKC did for gaming what Toy Story did for animated movies, and it happened a year earlier. What it certainly was mediocre. If the gameplay was that secondary to the graphics, DKC would be about as well remembered today as Myst. Was it derivative? Who cares? What game isn't derivative? It still set a new standard for the industry. It still had a crew of memorable characters, and thanks to its kinetic, crunchy, fast-paced gameplay, it still stands the test of time. But back in 1994, Donkey Kong Country was an instant success. Retailers couldn't keep it in stock over the holidays, and the game would go on to sell over 9 million copies. The King of the Jungle was back, and for the first time in years, Nintendo wasn't just competing with SEGA, Nintendo was winning. If you've enjoyed this video and you're a fan of Donkey Kong, then you really should pay a visit to DKVine.com. DKVine has been one of my favorite websites for, no joke, 15 years. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and trust me, DKVine's Kongversation is the best. They did an awesome spotlight series on Donkey Kong Country for the game's 20th anniversary, so definitely check that out by clicking here. Want early access to every critique I do? You can get these videos a day before everyone else, or even make me critique the game of your choice, by backing TGC on Patreon. Share this video with your favorite forums and subreddits, or just give it a thumbs up, which helps visibility on YouTube in a way that's just as ambiguous as DK's precise relation to Cranky. Like me on Facebook and follow me on Twitter, go back and watch my other episodes and retrospectives, and you keep geekin', I'll keep critiquing'. Thanks for watching.